and sometimes they have to stitch you up to make sure it stays closed, but other times it's still a problem even then. So your entire, ability to carry a child successfully is really dependent upon having a having a strong cervix, which you usually have naturally. And that is a big reason why sometimes women who have an operative surgery such as the D&C, typically for abortion, but like in my case I had to have one for miscarriage because it wouldn't, the process wouldn't complete on its own. So eventually there's a baby that was no longer living inside of me, and after a month of that, it needed to come out. Well, and actually I didn't have the D&C until even 4 months after that because I was still having problems and bleeding. But sometimes women who might maybe have abortions where it would involve, where they're far enough along that it would involve a D&C, what that is when a doctor goes to the cervix and they have to open it up. They have to force it open and then get instruments inside so that they can do the work or do whatever, whether it's for abortion or whether it's for something else. That's the only way to access that area. So when they artificially have to open up your cervix, that is an event that can also cause potentially cervical incompetence. So that in the future, if you're trying to carry and have babies, you're a little bit more at risk. If you have more than one, you're definitely at risk. I mean, if you have more abortions where this continues to be done, it's really not going to look too good for you if you want to have a baby later. And even just happening one time isn't really good for your body. So other things that can cause cervical incompetence and can weaken the cervix would be something like a biopsy of the cervix, because that's taking a chunk of skin from off of this important part of your body. And what this woman told me that she wanted, I'm explaining all of this because what this woman told me she wanted to do is she wanted to do a biopsy of my cervix. And she claimed that the reason was because I supposedly had, she said, in this visit, she said, I need to do a biopsy of your cervix. And I said, why? And she said, because you have HPV, which is an STD, which I had just been tested for and was confirmed I did not have. And I said, what do you mean I have an STD? Or HPV? And she said, you have HPV and I need to have a biopsy to have a better look. So for whatever reason, if a doctor says something like that to you, most of the time you just believe them. I mean, most of the time in my life I would take a doctor's word for it. It would be devastating, but I would take their word for it. And then for some reason, I just had this weird feeling that there was a different reason why she wanted access to my cervix. And I didn't know what it was, but I did not believe that I had HPV. I had just been tested and I didn't have it, and all I had was an undetermined PAP. It didn't say I had cancer or anything like that. It just said undetermined, like nobody knew why it was slightly different. And women can have these kinds of PAP results all the time for any kind of a reason. Sometimes your diet will change and things can change a little bit for one exam, and then the next one you go to, it's totally normal. And it's just, our bodies are always in a state of flux in some ways. And I had it's the first time I had an instinctive feeling that something was wrong, and she had a different motive for wanting to do a biopsy of my cervix. I didn't think, oh, she wants to do a biopsy and ruin my ability to have kids. I didn't think that. I just wasn't sure why she wanted to do it so badly, and I felt that it was wrong what she was telling me. And I also well, so anyway, that's about as much as I thought about it. I just didn't know why she was wanting to do it so badly, but and then I read about the risks and everything, and I thought and then that's when I found out by that time that all of this medical journal documentation had been done that made it very obvious that the only way you can have a truly abnormal pap for something like cervical cancer, which is why she said she wanted to do this biopsy, is if you have HPV. Well, and first, in that very first visit, she didn't say I had HPV and she could see it. I think that was, she just said she wanted to do a biopsy. And then I later called her on the phone, and I told her, well, the only reason why I would even have any kind of cervical cancer, you do a biopsy, is if I have HPV. And I just had a test and I don't. And then that's when she said over the phone, you do have it, I saw it. And there's no way that that's what she saw that. She was basically then trying to make an excuse for why she was saying she had to do a biopsy of my cervix in the first visit. And I went to another doctor who was a man, and I asked for a comprehensive HPV testing, and because I knew I didn't have it. I don't know how I knew, I just knew. And from all of the medical documents I was reading full journals and looking at full reports about it. All of the research showed that the only cause of cervical cancer, I'm not talking about ovarian cancer, other kinds of cancer that can happen that have nothing to do with like an STD, but the cause of any kind of cervical cancer is HPV. Very specific, and there are different strains of it. There's like, I don't remember, something like 100 different kinds of varieties of HPV. Just all slightly different from one from the other. And I had a comprehensive test done that screened for all of them, and for the ones that indicated, and the ones that went right to cervical cancer. And just because you have HPV doesn't mean that you will automatically get cervical cancer. It's just that if you have cervical cancer, the cause is HPV. That was known in, like, I think when that was 1998. 1999 that I was having those tests done. And the research and medical information was already out there. And I remember when I went in to have that test for HPV, all of the literature from the American Medical Association about HPV and cervical cancer was basically saying that it had nothing to do with STDs. And it wasn't giving people the same information that I was reading that doctors had and scientists had. So I asked somebody about it. I asked a doctor, and they said, well, they don't want to panic everybody. There's not a cure right now for HPV anyway, so why worry about it? And I just thought, well, if people should know what the risks are and then decide for themselves if they want to worry about it, because if that is true, then probably less people will be having unprotected sex, and probably some people will not be having sex at all until they're married or something, because of the risk of getting cervical cancer if you happen to get HPV. And HPV is extremely contagious. So basically, all the way around, I did not have it. I didn't have HPV, which meant and I was tested for every strain of it, which meant there's no possible way that I had cervical cancer, which meant that there was no reason why I would need to have a biopsy of my cervix, which then put this doctor in Oregon City into question as to why she was wanting to cut into my cervix. I mean, why go into my birth canal? And so I called her up and I let her know, and I said, you said that you saw that, and I said, you lied. And I told her to her face, it was the first time I'd ever told a doctor to their face, you lied. From that point on, I was not, I was kind of blacklisted with a lot of doctors because they made sure that people heard about me, and that doctor got freaked out that I was going to sue her because she was trying to do a treatment that there's no possible way. I mean, she did lie. She didn't see anything like that because I didn't have it. And I then continued to have my women's exams and my pap smears and everything on a regular basis for years. And every single one that came up after that was totally normal. I never had one that was one of these quote-unquote undetermined significance pap smears again. And I was tested for STDs again, and I never had any STD. Ever. So my health records have confirmed that I never had any STD, and I never had any kind of risk for cervical cancer. But the strange thing is that I had these doctors, and then Dr. O'Halloran, when she found out I wasn't going to have the biopsy, she basically didn't want me to go to her clinic anymore. So it's kind of like Dr. O'Halloran and then this other female doctor in Oregon City, in Oregon. They were trying to get a biopsy of my cervix, and I just later wondered, then that's when I wondered why they wanted to do that, because when they knew that I didn't have this problem, why would someone want to do some kind of a procedure like that unless when they know that it would weaken your cervix and make it harder for you to have kids in the future?